Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at using files in Python, and there are many reasons you'd want to use files. When you run your program, everything's stored in the RAM, except obviously the program itself. And so when the program finishes, you can no longer access everything. So if you store stuff in files, it can be used later on by other programs and if the program crashes. So for example, you might run a Python program and export a list of numbers or something, in which case you could then use that later on. You could get another program to look through it. When you use a file, there are four modes. You've got R, and this is your default value, and it stands for read, and this opens a file for reading, and if the file does not exist, you'll get an error. You also can't edit a file if you're reading from it, you can only see what's in it. Then you've got A, which is append, and this opens a file for appending, so you can add stuff to the end, and it will create the file if it does not exist. But if you try to delete something already there, then it won't let you do that. Then we've got W, which is for write, and this opens a file for writing, and it will create the file if it does not exist, but if there's already data in the file, it will overwrite it. Then you've got X, which stands for create. I know it should be a C, and this will create the specified file, and it will return an error if the file already exists. And so you could use create and write if you didn't want to overwrite a file, for example. You've also got T, which is for reading text, and this is the default mode. And then you've got B, which is for reading binary, and it's binary mode, and that allows you to read, for example, image data, because JPEGs obviously don't store text. Whereas this, you could, for example, read another Python program, which is a text file. If you just change the file extension, you'll see that. You could also use it for reading JSON, if you want to then turn it into a dictionary. You could use it for reading a CSV file, if you wanted to create some kind of multi-dimensional list with it. And when you're using a file, there are three stages. The first stage is opening the file, and then you read or write from the file, and then you close it. There could be some issues, so let's say you open it, you read it, and if there's an issue here, you try opening it and it doesn't exist, it will just crash and not do anything. But if you open it, read it, and let's say you're looking for numbers and it turns out there's a letter in there, and then it crashes your program, well, that means the file will still be left open, and that's not so much of a problem anymore, but could cause issues for other programs, or if you try and read it again later on. Also, when you're reading or writing from a file, no other file can access it, and likewise if someone else is using it, then it becomes locked for editing, which you may have seen in other examples. And actually this is also the same with a database connection, where you connect to your database, you do some data, when you probably have pessimistic locking, so no one else can edit it, and then you close your connection. And so in code, that looks like this. So you set file to opening the file, and you put the mode, then you do stuff with the file, and then you close it. And if you want to loop through the file line by line, you can actually use a for loop and loop through every line in the file. But again, if your program crashes while you're doing stuff with the file, then your program will just break. So instead, you might want to use this syntax, which is with open file name and the mode as the file, then you do stuff with the file. Looks quite similar to a for loop. In a sense, you've got for, and then in, and then a colon. And this kind of syntax is quite common in Python, if you haven't noticed yet. But this does mean that when you're then done with the file, it will close it automatically. And if your program crashes here, then the file will close before the program exits. And so that's really nice. And this is the standard way of doing it. It's best practice as well. If you want to read JSON, then instead of creating some sort of code that converts your dictionary or format to JSON, you could just use the built-in module JSON. In the same way, you don't need to generate random numbers, you can just use random. With JSON, you've got two functions that are important. The first one is JSON.loads, which converts a string into a dictionary. You've also got JSON.load, but that converts a file into a dictionary. And you've got JSON.dumps, which writes a dictionary into a string, and then you've also got JSON.dump, which writes it to a file. So now we're going to have a look at another Jupyter notebook to illustrate this concept. So here I've got the file directory, and you can see that currently we've just got our notebook. So the first thing I'm going to do is define this dictionary, and I'm going to import JSON. And with that, we're going to turn this dictionary into a string. We'll just run it. And it doesn't look very different, but the quotation marks around it kind of illustrate this, the string. Then we're going to open this new file in create mode, and then we're just going to close it. So that should create a new file, which we see there. Then we're going to open another file, and this is going to be called dict.json, and we're going to write the json.dump, so the string of the dictionary, into that file. So we'll run it. I can see that that file is being created. We can actually open it and see we've got some key and some value. Then we're going to open up the file, and we're just going to read it. And so we've got this string which has some key and some value. And then we're going to open it again, but this time we're going to load the dictionary into a dictionary instead of just leaving it as a string. And when we run it, it does look the same, but this time this is a dictionary and this is a string. And one way that you can tell is the quotation marks. So what's happened here is it's got the single quotation marks around the sides, but as it's printed it as a string, it's just left in the double ones. Whereas here, there are no quotation marks, so the default one is these single ones, which it's used. Here we've got a list, and we're going to use this join function, which is the opposite of the split function, which we looked at in the last video. And so you take a string in a list, and it gets every single item in the list and joins it with a string. So we'll just run that. And you see that our string now has these /ends. And it hasn't come out very well, but now they're all on a new line when we do that. It's also worth noting that if you then use the split function, you could then split it up again and turn it back into a list. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up this lists.txt file, which we haven't created yet, and we're going to write the string. So if we run that, you can now see it's created a list.txt file, and we can open it and see what it's got. Then we're going to open it up again, and we're going to print each line. And so we've got read, append, write, and create. But now, we're going to run this cell again, and then this one again. We can see now it's printed them all out twice. And that's because it's appended, so it's added them on to the end of the file. And you'll notice here that there's nothing in between these two. And that's because when we join them, we put a new line, but there's no new line at the end. So when we then append, we're appending from here. And so we've appended the read right after the create, which is quite useful because if you always had that new line at the end, it could cause problems in your program. So now we've had a look at reading and writing from files. You can save lots of things using Python in various different data formats. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again same time next week.